What is the line between content and somber? And then, what is the line between somber and melancholy? The poem that we have today, I think, represents the journey straight across through all three of these emotions. Welcome to Strip Cover Lit, where we squeeze the bigger picture out of literature. I'm Adrian Ford, and we are here today for a video which will appear in two separate playlists here on the channel. Number one being the poetry discussion playlist, now approaching 800 videos strong, but number two, the 30 must-read poems playlist. The poem today is I Wandered Lonely as a Cloud by William Wordsworth, one of my favorite poems, and it is one that I think is an emotional journey. This video will include three different parts. We will have a quick bio for William Wordsworth. We will go into the type of poetry that William Wordsworth was known for writing. And finally, we will have an analysis of the poem itself. So, who was William Wordsworth? William Wordsworth was born April 7th, 1770, in Cockermouth, Cumberland, England, which, and I looked into this, is not a Dr. Seuss book. His father, John, was a lawyer for James Lowther, the first Earl of Lonsdale, a man who probably needed legal counsel because his nicknames included such bangers as Wicked Jimmy, Gloomy Earl, the Bad Earl, and simply Jimmy. John's post was lucrative enough that the family had an extensive library, which he was taught to read by his mother, Anne Cookson. However, William's mother died when William was just 8 years old, and his father died 5 years later. In 1787, Wordsworth was published for the first time when the European magazine accepted his sonnet titled On Seeing Miss Helen Maria Williams Weep at a Tale of Distress, the title itself longer than most William Carlos Williams poems. This year also saw Wordsworth enroll at Cambridge, St. John's College in particular. He received a B.A. with honors in 1791. That same year, sympathizing with the Republican movement, he visited France, where he met Anne Vallon, who would give birth to their daughter Caroline the following year. In 1793, he would return to England alone, in part because of political tensions between the nations. The same year, he would publish both An Evening Walk and Descriptive Sketches, a promising enough start to his poetic career that within 2 years he had secured his benefactor, Raisley Calvert, to the tune of £900, the equivalent today of around £93,000, as an annuity. In 1798, he and Samuel Taylor Coleridge would publish lyrical ballads. Wordsworth's sister, Dorothy, contributed as well. In 1802, the Treaty of Amiens, paired with a settlement from Wicked Jimmy, the Wicked Jimmy estate, in the amount of £4,000, or roughly £460,000 today, allowed Wordsworth to reconnect with Anne Vallon and his daughter, Caroline. And William Wordsworth, now in his early 30s, would go on to marry Mary Hutchinson. Notably, Mary Hutchinson was not Anne Vallon. In 1803, Mary gave birth to John. In 1804, their daughter Dora was born. In 1806, their son Thomas was born. Then, in 1807, Wordsworth published poems in 2 volumes, which included I Wandered Lonely as a Cloud, London, 1802, The World is Too Much with Us, and The Solitary Reaper, all of which own the prestige of having videos dedicated to them on Strip Cover Lit. 1812 saw Wordsworth lose 2 of his children, Thomas, 6, to measles, and Catherine, only 3 years old, from complications with what may have been polio. In 1814, Wordsworth published The Excursion, a poem in 9 books. In 1843, against his own protestations and in the wake of growing critical acclaim, William Wordsworth became the Poet Laureate of the United Kingdom. After Robert Southey, he would be succeeded by Alfred Lord Tennyson. But it was not happily ever after, as Wordsworth would lose a third of his 6 children in 1847 when Dora would die of tuberculosis. William Wordsworth struggled with the loss and eventually gave up his work. On April 23, 1850, William Wordsworth died of pleurisy, aged 80. William Wordsworth wrote what were often referred to as ballads, and he also, historically, belongs to what is known as the Romantic movement. So, what are ballads? A popular narrative song passed down orally. In the English tradition, it usually follows a form of rhymed A-B-C-B quatrains, alternating 4 stress and 3 stress lines. Folk, or traditional ballads, are anonymous and recount tragic, comic, or hero stories with emphasis on a central dramatic event. Examples include Barbara Allen and John Henry. Beginning in the Renaissance, poets have adapted the conventions of the folk ballad for their own original compositions. Examples of this literary ballad forms includes John Keats' La Belle Dame Sans Merci, Thomas Hardy's During Wind and Rain, and Edgar Allan Poe's Annabel Lee. Romantic poetry is a poetic movement of the late 18th and early 19th centuries that turned toward nature and the interior world of feeling in opposition to the mannered formalism and disciplined scientific inquiry of the Enlightenment era that preceded it. English poets such as William Wordsworth, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, John Keats, Percy Bysshe Shelley, William Blake, and Lord Byron produced work that expressed spontaneous feelings, found parallels to their own emotional lives in the natural world, and celebrated creativity rather than logic. I wandered, lonely as a cloud that floats on high o'er vales and hills, when all at once I saw a crowd, a host of golden daffodils, beside the lake beneath the trees, fluttering and dancing in the breeze. Continuous as the stars that shine and twinkle on the Milky Way, they stretched in never-ending line along the margin of the bay. 10,000 saw I at a glance, tossing their heads in sprightly dance. The waves beside them danced, but they outdid the sparkling waves in glee. A poet could not but be gay in such a jocund company. I gazed and gazed, but little thought what wealth the show to me had brought. For oft, when on my couch I lie, in vacant or in pensive mood, they flash upon that inward eye, which is the bliss of solitude. And then my heart with pleasure fills, and dances with the daffodils. So there is something known as functional illiteracy. And what that means is you can read the words, but you don't really know what to do with them. You can go through the words and you can find things that make sense, but you can't put all of the sense together. One of the ways that this gets sort of sorted out on the diagnosis level is with instruction manuals. Instruction manuals, maybe you can read the words, you cannot apply those things that you're reading. This poem right here is, in my opinion, another great way to expose functional illiteracy. Nothing to be ashamed of, but it's something you need to work on. Not you, you're here. I trust you fully, but um, it's interesting because the reason I say all this, if you were to Google this poem right now, you would almost undoubtedly come across some very sort of surface level praise of this poem, but it wouldn't be just from someone with a YouTube channel who talks about how much they like poetry. If you were to Google right now, I wandered lonely as a cloud, analysis. I wandered lonely as a cloud, breakdown. I wandered lonely as a cloud, explained. In these blurbs, in these articles, on these websites that you will find, you are almost undoubtedly going to find the word lovely used to describe this poem. Something along those lines. Beautiful, lovely, nice, all of these things. And fair enough, I guess. Fair enough because it is a very catchy poem. Fair enough because it is a poem that will stick with you because of some of the sort of illustrious phrasing inside the poem. A host of golden daffodils. How beautiful is that phrase? Continuous as the stars that shine and twinkle on the Milky Way. Beautiful. But what are they saying? That's what they're describing is beautiful, is lovely. The rhythm and meter in the lines, beautiful or lovely. But you take one step further into these analyses and you will find the word nature. You will find the word memory. Well, yeah, that's what's happening in the poem. But I don't think it's the point of the poem. I think the point of the poem starts with the third word in, lonely. I wandered lonely as a cloud. This is an admission from our speaker. Our speaker is genderless in this poem, but I will refer to our speaker as a he for simplicity moving forward. Our speaker says he's lonely. This is not just a fact. Being alone is a fact. Being lonely is an emotion. Just like having nothing to do is a fact. Being bored is an emotion. Our speaker here is lonely by his own admission. Okay, fine. We've all been there. This is a commonplace human emotion to be lonely. But we take one step after this. That host of golden daffodils. Okay, great. We have a visual. The host of golden daffodils. Dancing in the breeze. We follow this same line of thought down to the end of the next stanza, tossing their head in sprightly dance. A poet could not help but be gay in such jocund company. Our speaker here is undoubtedly anthropomorphizing this host of golden daffodils. Our speaker here is assigning them their own human emotions. Our speaker here is empathizing with the flowers. Now, does not identify with the flowers because our speaker, remember, is lonely. But he is inspired in this poem by these daffodils who are dancing, whose heads are sprightly tossed about, who are jocund. These are all things which assign emotional status to those flowers. Well, I know that the source that I'm going to bring up is perhaps not the best, or I don't know if it's not the best, but it's perhaps not the most well known, but from therapyhelpers.com. This was the best way that I could search around and find these thought processes explained. Are empaths prone to depression? The constant flood of stressful emotions threatens to overwhelm empaths' coping resources. So empaths feel the emotions of other things. This speaker here is anthropomorphizing the flowers and then feeling their emotions. The constant flood of stressful emotions, the emotions from those flowers that does not exist in reality, threatens to overwhelm empaths' coping resources. If they lack strategies to set emotional boundaries and process difficult feelings, empaths often struggle with chronic anxiety, depression, physical illness, isolation, and more. Now, this part isn't really the most applicable here, but what we can understand from the poem itself is that if our speaker is feeling the emotions of flowers, probably he too feels the emotions of other people, reacts to the emotions of other people, whether those emotions are real or not, that will cause him constant flux. In a large study, highly empathetic people, like our speaker, showed a 300% higher risk of depression than the regular population. 60% of individuals seeking treatments for depression scored very high on empathy assessments. The empathy dimension of personal distress was positively linked to symptoms like psychomotor changes, concentration troubles, sadness, and guilt. I would argue that in the end, we see all of these things from our speaker here. Psychomotor changes. For oft when on my couch I lie. We have a speaker here that is very highly empathetic. And if we're looking at this, if we're paying attention to this poem here, and we get to this final stanza, for oft when on my couch I lie in vacant or in pensive mood, how often are we lying on that couch, vacant or pensive? It says oft. I often on my couch lie, vacant or in pensive mood. In fact, if we go that step further, we are told, for oft when on my couch I lie in vacant or in pensive mood, they flash upon my inward eye, which is the bliss of solitude. He lays on his couch in vacant or pensive mood, often enough for something to happen often therein. This is a subset of a subset. There is the universe that is all of my time. There is the subset of that, which is laying on my couch. There is the subset of the subset, which is when I'm laying on my couch in a vacant or pensive mood. Laying on your couch in a vacant or pensive mood certainly sounds like you are emotionally distressed. Certainly sounds as if there is perhaps something wrong in your world. Perhaps depression, something like this. For that to be the case often enough, that there is a subset of the vacant, pensive laying, which is, then I remember the daffodils. That's a subset of a subset of a subset. If the subset of a subset of a subset happens often enough, probably that first subset is kind of a big deal in your life. Laying on your couch, probably not the healthiest thing to take up too terribly much of your time. So, is this a jingle of a poem to read? Yes. Sure, it is. Are the subjects of nature and memory mentioned in this poem? Yeah, absolutely. What is this poem about? This poem is about a man who is struggling, or a woman who is struggling through whatever it is through which they are struggling. This poem is not about nature. This poem is not about memory. This poem is not a pretty poem. This poem is dark. The question of voice, if you will. Oftentimes, voice is reserved for prose in literature, but the voice here is what is throwing off so many interpretations. The voice here is pretty, is prosaical. The voice here is very alluring, very nice to listen to, but just like a siren song, you are being lured in to something which is ever darker, ever deeper. This poem is not about how pretty nature is. There are some pretty descriptions of these flowers, but this poem truly is about struggle. That is all I have for this poetry discussion. If you like or appreciate what it is that I do here, hitting the like button really does help me out, as it tells YouTube to share this video with other literature lovers if you find yourself here by chance but not design. Literature is the only thing I talk about on this channel, dropping multiple videos every single week. There's poetry every Monday, and I hope to have you back for the next one.